Hello all, Ana Castillo here. Today's video will consist of Tier 3 behavior interventions. I will talk about, as usual, I will talk about some things that I found very interesting and that surprised me, as well as some things that I think I will directly implement in my classroom instruction. Um, and finally, I will close today with my final thoughts of an overall of what I have learned in this behavior interventions course. So to start with, I wanted to just kind of give a little overview of how Tier 3 is completely different from Tier 1 and Tier 2. So Tier 1 and Tier 2 focus more, so Tier 1 specifically focuses on behavior as a school-wide thing. So kind of if you're implementing PBIS in your whole school, then that's kind of what all students are getting, which would be in this case a PBIS intervention program. Tier 2 is more classroom specific, and it's how you implement it, whether you have a different classroom management plan in place, which could be different from the whole school implementation, but for better results, it would be best if you'd be following the whole school implementation program, unless the school doesn't have one, and then go ahead and pick your own implementation program for behavior interventions. Whereas Tier 3 is different in the sense that it's a very small amount of students that typically need Tier 3 interventions, um, as well as it's a very individualized and student specific as well as behavior specific. So in this case, in Tier 3, you'd be targeting a specific behavior that you want to change. And in order for you to be able to do that, one thing that I've learned in this past week is that a lot of it is going to depend on what is causing the behavior, so the antecedent. Um, and that's one of your driving factors. So I know we've learned in class that in order for you to be able to change a behavior, you have to be able to know what's causing the behavior. So you're not walking in to like, let me just stop this child from talking, but you have no idea why this child is talking. Or I mean, of course, a behavior that causes Tier 3 would be a lot more serious in the sense that it would be disruptive to the whole classroom, and it would be preventing them from helping, and kind of impedes on the rights of other students as well. So during our lectures, one of the things that I found very helpful, specifically with my functional behavior analysis that we're working on right now, was the article about Lloyd Weaver and Staubitz, as well as chapter 6 that talks about how to plan a behavior intervention plan, as well as chapter 5, which talks specifically about behavior, the functional behavior assessment. And I found the Staubitz or Weaver and Lloyd article specifically helpful, as well as the other chapters, as I mentioned, because it breaks down the process of how to go about and creating these or making these interventions. The Staubitz, Weaver, and Lloyd specifically focus on the structure analysis, which I didn't know, but it's also pretty much called an antecedent analysis, which is the first part of doing the FBA and the BIP. All of these three readings do a good job, like I said, of breaking down the process and how it should be done. I like the structure analysis one because it helped me before I started my observations. It helped me to see that I needed to focus on one thing specifically, and actually in the middle of it. So it took me starting to do my observations so that I can make that connection that, hey, I need to either focus on the behavior that's happening, how often it's happening, or focus during the what time or what period it's happening, because I found myself taking notes and I was getting caught up with like, okay, what time is it? Okay, what's the behavior? And by the time that I got to the behavior that was happening and how often it was happening, I was losing some of the things that were going on. So I did focus on what the behavior was and how often it was happening versus what time of the day it was happening, and I was able to directly implement the suggestions that were given in that article into my observations. Hmm. Another thing that I found interesting was the article on the effects of parenting behavior on pro-social behavior on Chinese adolescents in Hong Kong. This is the article by, I am going to butcher these names. I believe it was Sai, Ning, Yang, and Yang. Um, in this article, brought something in perspective that I feel sometimes as teachers and even as parents we lack acknowledging, which is that genders are treated differently and that directly the behaviors that are taught at home are going to directly show in the classroom. Where so it talked a little bit about how boys are treated differently, and a lot of times boys are seen as they need to have parents need to have more of a control and a handle on them, versus girls is more like, oh, they're so sweet and gentle and things like that. And so I thought that that was very interesting, because I feel that when we're talking about tier 3 interventions, that's another aspect that we have to consider, that maybe at home if they're being a little rambunctious, it's okay, because like that saying that a lot of people use is boys will be boys. Well, we have to realize that maybe they're coming in from a home where they were taught that boys will be boys and it's okay. And that if we're going to try to change that behavior, then we're going to have to really know the background of this child, which includes, their parents' beliefs as well as their cultural beliefs and how their culture addresses certain behaviors. Which kind of leads me into the article that I found, I guess, the most surprising, and at the same time, it saddened me a bit. Um, and this was the article that was talking, I think it was Skiba, Horner, Rausch, Chung, May, and Tobins. And this is the article that talked about disproportionality in the classroom and how it occurs, and it can be found in both office referrals, um, and as well as in administrative decisions. And this one was specifically sad to read just because it brought into perspective how culture is playing a big role in the decision and in consequences that students get. And I directly tied it in with a Netflix documentary that I watched. It's called 13th. And it was a little sad to see that our African American students are and our Hispanic students are getting more office referrals than their white counterparts. And it was even more scary because when I was looking at the data that was in this article, it part of the data it talked about, it had the number of students, of African American students that were in this study, which was, I believe, around 11, between 11 to 12,000 students, whereas the students that were white that were involved in this research, there were twice as many students, but the same percentage of referrals. So I guess common sense would dictate that the bigger the population, the more referrals you're going to see. However, in the data, it showed that a population that had twice as many students represented had the same percentage of students that were a different race, in this case African Americans, had the same percentage of students that were being sent with referrals. So that was very scary to see because I am a mom and my child is a minority. He is Hispanic. And when I connected that to the 13th documentary, it almost mirrored the results. It mirrored that Hispanics and African Americans are more likely to be incarcerated. And it made me feel that our students, because of our biases and our lack of considering culture as a factor, they're already coming into the place more likely to fail because of the fact that we're not considering all the factors and we're not trying to find the underlying issue of what is causing a specific behavior. And many times it really is culture. So that was scary for me to see because that just means that I, as a mother, am going to have to teach my child two times harder than that their behavior is going to affect the way that they're perceived in school. And I feel like it shouldn't be something that we should have to do, and that having our teachers be more culturally aware and would be something simple as providing, trainings on it and trying to implement programs where the teachers are immersed in that child's classroom, in the child's culture versus, them being immersed into ours. Specifically when you have school environments that have a specific culture or a race that is enrolled in that school district. But that was extremely difficult for me to see, and I feel that if I were to go into the classroom, I would really go out of my way to try to make sure that I am understanding my students' culture behaviors. Realistically speaking, I know that it's going to be very difficult and it's probably going to take a couple of years to gain enough knowledge to where and have enough training to where I am making sure that I know the role that culture plays in the classroom and in students' behavior. But I feel that ultimately it is something that will definitely have a huge impact regarding my behavior management in my classrooms. I will say that I personally have not had a lot of problems behavior wise with students not responding to me, but there were a couple, and this course, and specifically these tier 3 interventions, really helped me see how important it is to conduct those, FBAs, and to find out what the antecedent is to a behavior. Whereas before, I'm sad to say, but I was that teacher that sometimes I was like, oh, this kid really is just lazy, or oh my God, he just it's his parents' fault. And this course has really helped me kind of step back and say, as a teacher, what can I do? Okay, yes, maybe he has parents that are not responsive to him or that are not involved, but that doesn't excuse me trying not lacking, or it doesn't excuse me not trying to help this student. So that's definitely something that I will be doing differently in the classroom. And finally, I felt like learning about behavior interventions, it really helped me see how important the data is. Mostly all the articles that we had some kind of statistics, and it helped me see that the data is telling us things and we need to find out what it is, whether it is because we have to find better, it's going to help us find better behavior interventions for our students, or whether it's going to help us use that data to focus on the specific behavior and find patterns in it so that we can better target it with our students and try to change that behavior. And all in all, I feel that it was extremely important to learn about all of these things. One thing that did surprise me was that it talked about students in SPED, and this was specifically, I guess, eye-opening for me because in my past school we had a student that lit the restroom trash can on fire, and it was I was a little ignorant at that point, and all I can see is how did this child not get moved to an AP campus? He lit a trash can on fire. The school had to be evacuated. The fire was getting out of control. I mean, it was a very serious offense. It put other children's life in danger, not to mention that he had done it in the pre-K kinder hall. So very small children could have very much been hurt. And after reading the article, one of our articles, it talked about how students that are in special education, and that for if they for any reason have to be moved from their placement, whether that's gen ed or PPCD classroom or anything, and if the cause of that movement is a behavior, that there has to be a FBA conducted on them. And so it kind of was a little bit eye-opening that a lot of the things in regards to behavior are potentially happening in our schools. We're just not aware of them unless we read about it. So I found that very, very interesting, and I immediately, called a friend to see if those things were happening in the school, and she said yes, they do. It's just that classroom teachers are usually not made aware of them. So I found that very interesting. But all in all, this course has provided me with an abundance of insight regarding interventions and resources as well that I could definitely use if I were to go back into the classroom. It has, but more importantly, I feel that it has changed my view on behavior and how I would react to it. It has made me aware that behavior can be changed, and that if we take the time to build a relationship with our students and try to find the underlying cause of a specific behavior, we can make a more suitable learning environment for our students that are experiencing behavior problems, and that it might not necessarily be because they just want to act out, but that there's an underlying reason and things that they just can't control. And so their behavior is almost a way of them asking for help. So I think it was a very powerful course to take, and very full of resources that I can definitely use. Like I said, whether I go back into the classroom, or I can use if I become a diagnostician, to help other students and to make sure that a student is being referred not just because of behavior, but because of learning disability. And if it is behavior, then I can better use the resources to make sure that the correct steps are being taken to refer those students. I hope that this video provided you with a little bit of insight of all the things that I have learned, and I will see you soon. Thank you.